Right now, you probably consider yourself a good person. You help others, live by your values, and don't intentionally hurt innocents. You're not like those people in the history books who participated in atrocities or turned a blind eye to suffering. But decades of psychological research have revealed an uncomfortable truth. Write an opening sentence like this: illusion of innocence and the mechanisms of obedience. Perhaps you still believe that you are a good person. You help your friends, you feel compassion for the suffering of others, and deep down, you never wish to hurt anyone. You will say, "I am different from those who committed crimes in history. I could never become them." That assertion rings like a naive oath, an invisible wall shielding us from questioning. But does it truly protect us? Or is it only a veil, fragile yet persistent, that lulls us into the illusion of our own innocence? History tells a different story. Those who took part in collective crimes, from the Holocaust to forced labor camps, from the genocides in Rwanda to re-education camps, were mostly not monsters. They did not grow fangs, nor have the blood-red eyes of demons. They were fathers, mothers, ordinary clerks, law-abiding citizens, and precisely in that normality, evil found fertile ground to flourish. The illusion of goodness. Human beings have a deep need to believe that they are righteous, that they are standing on the right side of history. Psychologists call this the better-than-average effect. Each of us thinks we are more honest than most, kinder than most, and therefore less likely to commit moral mistakes. But this very belief makes it easier for us to close our eyes to the things we help sustain. Imagine this. An office worker discovers his company is hiding figures to deceive clients. He is not a deceitful man, but he tells himself, "I'm just a small cog, this has nothing to do with me." That statement, which sounds harmless, is in fact the first step to making him an accomplice, not because he wants to harm others, but because he believes he is still a good person, even though he has chosen silence. Meanwhile, his neighbor may easily criticize that cowardice, but if placed in the same situation, they might act no differently. Evil, like a mirror, never shows us its true face. It only reflects an image we want to see: a gentle citizen, a hard-working laborer, a decent human being. Hannah Arendt and the Banality of Evil. In the trial of Adolf Eichmann, one of the architects of the Holocaust, the philosopher Hannah Arendt observed something that made her shudder. Eichmann was not a madman. He did not have bloody rages, nor did he swear to destroy humanity. He sat there, calm, answering each question like a diligent bureaucrat. Arendt named this discovery the banality of evil. Evil does not always arise from burning hatred or boundless greed. It is often nourished in indifference, in the habit of obedience, in following regulations without questioning. Eichmann did not see himself as a villain. He was merely carrying out orders, a cog in the machine. But that very ceasing to think turned him into an instrument of one of the greatest crimes in history. What Arendt wanted to remind us of is truly frightening. One does not need to be deranged to commit evil. It is enough to stop thinking, to hand over all responsibility to the system, and evil will creep through our hands, even as we still claim to be good people. The psychology of obedience. More than 2 decades after the war, the psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted a shocking experiment. He recruited ordinary people, teachers, carpenters, housewives, and had them participate in a learning experiment. Their task was to punish another person with electric shocks whenever they answered incorrectly. The punished person was actually an actor, but the participants did not know. And the horrifying thing happened. 65% were willing to deliver shocks that seemed lethal, simply because a man in a white coat, the symbol of authority, told them to continue. What made them act that way? Not malice, not the pleasure of causing pain, but obedience itself. When faced with authority, most people choose obedience over responsibility. They believe that the consequences are not theirs, that the one giving the orders is the one who bears the ultimate responsibility. Solomon Asch, another psychologist, revealed another piece of the puzzle. People easily abandon their own direct perception to conform to the crowd. When everyone around affirmed an obviously wrong answer, 75% of participants agreed at least once, even though their eyes saw the truth differently. This is the herd instinct that Nietzsche once warned about. When uncertain, we seek certainty in the views of others, even when those views contradict our own reason. Language and the mask of crime. If obedience is the chain that binds actions, then language is the cloth that blinds conscience. In the fascist regime, they did not speak of killing, but of resettlement. They did not discuss massacres, but the final solution. Technocratic language turned human suffering into a technical problem. It created distance so that the perpetrators could still sleep soundly, believing they were doing professional work. Today, we also see such language. Technology companies optimize engagement. Governments ensure national security. Businesses reduce personnel costs. Each phrase is sugar-coated, making us forget that behind it are lost jobs, violated privacy, divided communities. Language, as the philosopher Wittgenstein once said, is the limit of the world we see. When we accept language to cover things, we lose the ability to call them by their true names, and from there, we lose the ability to confront moral truth. The modern world does not lack such systems where authority, language, and habits of obedience intertwine, making us unconsciously complicit. But the most important question is not, why are people so easily obedient? But rather, how did a few dare to resist? If evil can be banal, then resistance too can begin from ordinary things, and it is precisely there that we find hope. The cracks of resistance and the power of conscience. There is something strange. In the same system where the majority bow their heads, there are still a few who choose another path. They are not stronger, not more powerful, sometimes even weaker in status and safety. Yet, they dared to say, no. History preserves the names of a few, but most have been forgotten. Nevertheless, their existence is proof. Even in the darkest machinery, there are still small cracks through which light can seep. The story of resistors. In the dark days of World War II, when all of Europe was engulfed in the shadow of fascism, there was a woman named Irina Sendler. She was a social worker in Poland, and while thousands of her compatriots turned away from the sight of Jews locked in the Warsaw Ghetto, she secretly smuggled out more than 2,000 children. She had no weapons, no political power, only one principle. She could not stand by and watch innocent lives slowly die in silence. Or Karen Silkwood, an ordinary technician in a nuclear plant in the United States. She discovered serious violations threatening the lives of workers and the community. Instead of staying silent to keep her job, she spoke up, accepting isolation and danger. She lost her life in a suspicious accident, but her story remains a symbol of moral courage. People like them raise a question for us. What made them different from the majority who chose safety? Living by self-values. Researchers call this the capacity to maintain an independent value system. Instead of defining themselves through the eyes of others, they found standards in their own conscience. This is the key. Resistors do not need social recognition to act. On the contrary, resistance against the crowd strengthens their character. Nietzsche once spoke of the Superman, one who does not live by the morality of the herd, but creates his own table of values. A resistor does not need to be superhuman, but they dare to step out of the safety zone of consensus, dare to accept loneliness instead of betraying themselves. In a world where the majority see obedience as virtue, they choose disobedience as the highest form of loyalty. Loyalty to humanity. The power of small habits. Do not think that great actions arise from explosive moments. Aristotle once said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Therefore, virtue is not an act, but a habit. Those who can resist the storm of social pressure have usually practiced standing firm in smaller wins. Imagine a young employee in a company. He is asked to alter numbers to beautify a report. If he is used to refusing unreasonable small requests, from not falsifying travel expenses to not joining in petty shady games, then he will have the foundation to refuse greater pressures. Conversely, If he often yields in seemingly harmless matters, then when faced with a bigger trial, he will likely give in again. Resistance, therefore, is not a heroic flash, but long, quiet training, like muscles being built day by day. Personal responsibility, the core of freedom. Sartre, the existentialist philosopher, once affirmed, "Man is condemned to be free." The statement sounds paradoxical, but it is the essence of responsibility. Freedom is not only the right to choose, but also the duty to bear the consequences of that choice. Resistors differ from the obedient in this. They do not allow themselves to hide within the system. The phrase, "I was just following orders," is the most common ticket to escape responsibility. But Sartre would call that existential evasion. When we hand over our freedom to authority, we do not truly escape responsibility. We only deceive ourselves to find temporary peace. Resistors recognize this. They accept that every action, however small, is a definition of who they are. The power of solidarity. However, resistance is not always a solitary path. On the contrary, many studies show that having even one ally significantly increases the likelihood of resistance. In Asch's experiment, if there was even one supporter of the correct answer, the rate of conformity to the wrong majority dropped sharply. This reveals a truth. Resistance spreads. An individual who dares to say no unintentionally empowers others to also dare to say no. A community of values, no matter how small, becomes a shield so that people do not feel like oddities. That is why a resistance movement is sometimes sparked by just a few who dare to stand tall. Political philosophy calls this moral solidarity, a bond not based on interest, but on sharing the same responsibility before truth. The strategy of persistence. Resistance is not just an outburst of emotion. It requires strategy. The courageous do not only shout in despair, but also know how to sustain the flame in a world that easily extinguishes every light. They record evidence, learn protective laws, build support networks, and even prepare escape routes. Sometimes, resistance does not mean direct confrontation, but preserving the flame of conscience until the right moment. A teacher who firmly refuses to inflate grades under pressure may set a precedent for students to learn the value of fairness. A nurse who dares to report unsafe conditions may spark hospital reforms. Small actions, if sustained, will become seeds of great change. Resistance begins with silent choices. The most important thing to remember is this. Moral courage does not begin in grand historical pages. It sprouts from small choices, in unnoticed rooms. When an employee refuses to sign a false report, when a student speaks up against bullying, when a citizen dares to question the government about an unjust policy, all are pieces of resistance. And just like evil, resistance does not wear the shining face of heroism. It is often quiet, sometimes clumsy, and nearly invisible. But precisely from that quietness, a foundation is built. A foundation so that when the great moment arrives, people can stand tall, without fear. We cannot detach ourselves from economic, technological, political structures. So how do we live in a way that both acknowledges inevitable complicity, yet does not abandon responsibility? The answer will unfold in the next part, where the art of mindful living is discussed as a method of resisting the banality of evil. Responsibility in the modern age and the art of living mindfully. We often think that evil is a special event. A war, a brutal regime, a rebellious dictator. But the truth is much harder to accept. Evil is not outside of everyday life. It hides right within small actions, familiar decisions. It lurks inside the very systems we participate in every day: work, social media, the economy, even seemingly harmless consumer habits. We cannot live outside the system, but we can choose how we show up within it. This is the challenge of the modern world. How to live responsibly in a complex society where complicity seems inevitable. Invisible complicity. Look at the smartphone in your hand. It is the doorway connecting you to the world, a tool for learning, working, entertaining. But behind the bright glow of the screen are mines where children must dig for rare earths, factories where workers labor to exhaustion, algorithms designed to capture your attention regardless of psychological consequences. You do not directly cause these things, but your daily use supports a system that feeds on that harm. Such examples abound. A seemingly harmless investment in a retirement fund may be fueling corporations that devastate the environment. A single click to like a video on social media may help spread misinformation. A decision to stay silent at work may reinforce a culture of covering up wrongdoing. Albert Bandura called this phenomenon moral disengagement. Humans tend to separate their actions from their real consequences, justifying by saying, "I'm just a small part. I don't make policy. I'm not responsible for the whole system." But that very disengagement allows us to keep participating without guilt. When righteousness becomes pretext. The irony is, sometimes evil is not just hidden by indifference, but dressed in the guise of righteousness. History is full of movements in the name of justice that spread terror. Those who joined did not see themselves as criminals. On the contrary, they believed they were saviors. Nietzsche warned, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." When we believe our goal is absolute, we easily justify ruthless means. When we believe we are the good side, we turn others into the embodiment of evil, and thus permit ourselves to do anything to them. Even in modern life, we see this mechanism. An environmental activist may justify abusing power because, "My goal is righteous." A health company may say, "We help people be happy," while its true business model relies on keeping customers forever insecure about their bodies. A political organization may claim to defend freedom while trampling on the freedoms of others. Evil no longer needs cruelty. It only needs the absolute certainty that we are right, they are wrong. Morality in an imperfect world. This is the tragedy of the modern world. No one can be completely pure. Every choice we make is tied to a chain of complex consequences beyond our control. Eating a meal, buying an item, using a service, all are linked to the global web of labor, extraction, transport, production. If we demand absolute purity, we fall into despair or indifference. But to abandon responsibility altogether is to surrender to the system. So what path remains? Some philosophers and activists suggest the concept of harm reduction. Instead of seeking impossible purity, we try to minimize the harm we cause while contributing to broader structural change. Living ethically in a complex world is not living perfectly, but living consciously, practicing moral mindfulness. So what does it mean to live consciously? It begins with naming things as they are. Do not hide behind sugar-coated language. If a policy causes suffering to the vulnerable, dare to call it cruel, not economic reform. If an algorithm spreads division, call it a harmful tool, not engagement optimization. One simple practice is to ask, if this happened to someone I love, what word would I use to describe it? That question helps us cut through technocratic language and face reality directly. Another way is keeping a moral journal, recording the choices you made during the day, comparing them with the values you claim. This habit helps you see the gap between ideals and actions. Not to torture yourself with guilt, but to cultivate awareness. Finally, we must train the ability to live with uncertainty. In a world full of conflicting information, the easiest path is to follow whoever appears most certain. But in that very moment, the most important resistance is daring to admit, "I don't know, I need to think." The ability to endure uncertainty is the foundation of intellectual freedom. Moral courage as an art of living. When thinking about responsibility, we often imagine it as a burden, a stone we must carry. But philosophy offers another view. Responsibility is also the chance to affirm our humanity. For in the moment we choose to act, despite the ease of silence, we discover the depth of our freedom. History is not short of evidence. Those who led slaves across the Underground Railroad in America were not superhuman. They were just individuals who accepted danger to save lives. The civil rights activists of the segregation era were not wealthy or powerful. They simply persevered against unjust laws. They were not perfect, not flawless. They had only one thing: the courage not to betray their conscience. Today, the opportunities for such actions still exist, though less dramatic. It may be an office worker daring to question a harmful policy, an engineer daring to speak the truth about a security flaw, a doctor refusing to compromise with fraudulent pharmaceuticals. Each small act may never be recorded in history, but they are the soil in which transformation grows. Evil does not need bloodthirsty monsters to survive. It only needs ordinary people to stop thinking, stop questioning, stop taking responsibility. But the light of resistance does not need superhuman heroes either. It only needs ordinary people who dare to keep their conscience, who dare to say no in the smallest moments. You cannot achieve perfection, but you can be mindful. You cannot eliminate all evil, but you can lessen your complicity. You cannot change the world instantly, but you can change the way you stand in the world, with open eyes, with free will, with the courage not to be swept away. And from those small, quiet choices, you prepare yourself for something greater. When the big moment comes, you will be ready. What do you think about each of our responsibilities in a world full of complex systems? Is daily mindfulness enough to resist banal evil? Share your perspective in the comments. I would love to listen. If you find these reflections meaningful, don't forget to follow the channel so we can continue this philosophical dialogue and search for light in the darkness together.